Hi everybody, I'm Dold with Aquia. I am on week 4, day 3 at Aquia. So I'm going to do my best to explain what we do. And if you have more questions, we have some other folks in the team here. So Aquia is a digital experience platform. So shout out to all of our customers that are here, all of our future customers that are here. And we bring together your web content and your digital assets and your customer data to really help you create an immersive, personalized learning experience. So when you think about what Jamie was talking about with regard to Planet Fitness, 70–80% of your customers are doing all their research online before they're even talking to someone. That's as true for consumer marketing as it is for B2B. So you really want to ensure that you're having an impactful digital experience to help drive those conversions. So that's where I'm going to help you. I very much enjoyed all of these presentations today. So even though I'm with Acquia, which is a B2B sales motion, I was in the consumer space for about 10 years. So I'd like to say that I'm a B2B marketer with B2C sensibilities. And I'm super excited to be up here with Shilpa Reddy, who's with Acorns. And Shilpa has a really interesting background. She spent, 7–8 years in a more traditional CPG type of environment, and now she's with a fintech company. So before we dive into talking about influencers and the great work that she's doing at Acorns with influencers, maybe you can share a little bit about your journey.
So we will just trade mics for this one. Hello, everyone. It is very nice to see some familiar faces and some unfamiliar ones. But my journey a little bit. Yes, I was at P&G for 7 years. Every year, people were like, "Are you leaving yet?" And I was like, "Nah, not quite yet." But honestly, before I got to P&G, I'd worked at very, very small companies. So I worked on a family business, launching a tea brand that still sells today in Whole Foods. It's called Acquia. If you are ever there, it's a great tea brand. But anyway, I just worked at small companies before then. And I hit a point where I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I went to school, but I didn't learn very much. So I better go somewhere people will teach me marketing. And so I went to P&G. And every year I raised my hand and said, I want to do the thing that's new and different. And turns out then e-commerce was actually new and different. So I ended up on that. And through that, I hit a point where 7 years in, 2 things happened. One, I asked myself, does brand marketing work outside of this context where everyone drinks the Kool-Aid of brand marketing? I don't know, and I want to learn. Second, Costco and Walmart weren't giving me the data that I wanted to be able to optimize my marketing. And so wanted to be at a place where I had access to that data. And that's when I made the switch over to technology companies. I was actually at Harboros, another Boston-based company, for 3 years. And then switched over to Acorns, kind of harkening back to when I was at Lehman Brothers for a very short period of time that I may not talk about. But it was not quite full circle, but it was good to be back in the financial space, but in a very, very different way, because Acorns is really, it serves customers who raise their hand and say, I don't really know anything about this, help me here. So a very different space than some other financial firms.
Still out.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit more about Acorns and what you all do there?
Absolutely. So I talked a little bit about one of the barriers we addressed, but maybe the even more fundamental barrier is people who say, I know I should be saving and investing, but I have no money, so how am I going to do this? So with Acorns, our primary customer, our primary target is who we think of as everyday Americans. We don't really think of it as an age or a household income because there are 2 95-year-olds on Acorns who are saving for their future. And who am I to tell them you're not my target audience, you know? So it's really the psychographic of people who describe themselves as being growth-minded, in that they want the future to be better than their lives today, and they're willing to do some work to get there. Where Acorns helps is our very first product feature that kind of shot us to grow is roundups, which is every time you pay for a purchase, we round up the spare change and we invest that for you. Now, if all you do is roundups, it's probably not going to change your life. So our job is to set up the right habits. So from roundups, you start investing $5 a week. It adds up, you invest a piece of your paycheck. And from tiny acorns, mighty oaks do grow. And there comes your wealth.
Hello, test. It's gonna be a little closer.
All right, we're up and running. I also turned it on, so that might be a different. Okay, so amazing. So let's talk about influencers and how you're leveraging influencers to drive your connections with customers. So you recently launched a new debit card product in partnership with Dwayne Johnson. So can you share a little bit about how that all came together and how you selected Rock to work with?
Totally, yeah. This was a fun one. We just launched the card actually this November, and it may be the first financial product to launch on Kimmel, because that is how we went to market that night. But backing up to the story of why the Rock and why we ended up here. So it really began, and I actually have a slide for this, I believe, that tells the story of Dwayne Johnson and how it connects to Acorns. It started a long time ago. This was one that we've had in the works for several years. And it really began with how can we find somebody who can physically and metaphorically tell the story of from tiny acorns, mighty oaks do grow. And with Dwayne Johnson, there was the story of when he only had $7 in his pocket. And from that moment, he has built to be where he is today. And it is through endless hard work and taking healthy habits, taking it step by step. And he in many ways personified the story of acorns, of put tiny acorns aside, it adds up. You put spare change aside, it adds up. You begin with what you have. And so that was the fundamental thing that drew us to him. And so it took putting together this partnership over many years and convincing him about the story of Acorns, all the way to actually making him an investor in a company. That's how deep our partnership went to bring this product to market.
That's amazing. I love that. So what was your process like when planning for this launch? Thinking about how to create this a really immersive experience, and what did the customer journey look like for you?
Yeah, it's actually great to be going right after the previous panel where you talked about awareness and consideration and how many steps it takes. As we were putting together the campaign, there was the side of, does the story make sense? And then there was the side of, media is really expensive. It's really hard to break through. We're a small company. We, have to pay Dwayne Johnson. And we don't have enough money to pay Dwayne Johnson and do media. So how do you build this thing? So we actually built it in a very integrated way, all the way from ad through the product experience, through the unboxing journey, through to advocacy and referral, because we knew we had one shot at grabbing somebody's attention, but we didn't have the money for multiple paid touches. So it was really important to bring that experience and storytelling through multiple touch points on our own channels that was good enough for people to come back to. And we didn't have to spend another dollar retargeting them to come back. So I actually have some examples.
I was going to say, I think you have a slide on that.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of just our customer journey. I dropped out the ad pieces of it. It's all over Instagram and TikTok. But beyond the ad, it was, from, we're an app. That's how people find us. So all the way from the app store to the registration funnel to the experience of getting an email that tells you your card is on the way, to the unboxing experience, where we spent months designing the packaging and the story that went on the box that they received. Because we wanted that to be a moment where customers really experienced Dwayne Johnson in a mini form. And we know, card activation is very low in this market. So we needed to get that moment of card activation. through to what happens after that. Don't quite see it in this slide, but the first 7 roundups that the person does using this card, we actually match the roundups. So at every point in those first 7 interactions, there is a moment of what we talk of as a dopamine hit, because our brand is one that stands for hope and optimism. We constantly ask ourselves, if you have to make people take the right small, healthy habit steps, how do you encourage them on the spot? And it's through these hits of dopamine. So that's part of what we move into the customer journey.
That's great. And you mentioned that a lot of time and money went into the product development, and that leaves you with kind of a lack of funds from a ad perspective, right? So how did you leverage your digital channels to really drive interest in the card and create that experience and bring that audience that you're going after to this card?
Yeah. Going back to CPG world, right, and leaving P&G because I wasn't sure brand marketing worked, or I believed it worked, but I wanted to prove it out in a very different context. We very much took a branded performance route here. So all of our media, regardless where in the funnel it falls, is measured from a cost per acquisition standpoint. It meets different thresholds, of course. But in this particular case, it was really, really important to make that first impression count. And so to make that first impression count, we probably had, at this point, we probably have 45 different pieces of creative. We iterate on that creative every day to put out the best message that works. Because creative is what helps us make that perfect first impression that is long-lasting and breaks through. So that's really where we invested, more in the creative and the storytelling than in the media side of it.
Okay, and I have a question that's off script, but I'm wondering, what did Dwayne Johnson do based on his following to help amplify your message?
Good question. So this is where partnering with him in this very deep way was quite impactful, right? Because we had shared incentives here. And so we actually had him doing a lot of the social posts. And that was our awareness play. At this point, he's probably done 8 or 9 social posts for us. And when you think about his global following, even though Acorns is just in the US, we do have a brand, Go Henry, that operates in the UK as well. And so he has over 450 million social followers. So 8 social posts from him across multiple platforms translates into a lot of eyeballs. And that was our awareness play.
That's amazing. It's a lot of money to pay for those impressions. Okay, last couple questions. So how is it going? And also, how are you measuring success?
Yeah, measuring success 2 ways. I'll take that one first and then I'll come back to how it's going. First way of measuring success is acquisition. That's the lifeblood of our business. We are a small brand. We believe we want to serve millions more everyday Americans, and the only way to serve them is to grow. So CAC is what we look at. The volume of acquisition is what we look at. And this piece of creative, because the way you scale, of course, is you lower your CAC and then you get more money to scale. This piece of creative is trending about 20% below our average CAC. So significant in terms of what it unlocks for us from a scale perspective. So that's one way we think about it. But the other way we're measuring success is how deep is the engagement with the Acorns system of products because of this card. Because while we began as spare change, again, if all a person is doing is invest in spare change, that's not going to change life outcomes. So we need to be making sure that there's more money coming into the Acorns system, i.e. they're saving and investing more, and that money is in turn growing to lead to different life outcomes. And what we have found is in just the first 2 months of the Mighty Oak product, which is the card with Dwayne Johnson, on average, people have invested $526. So that means in 4 months, they're well on their way to having $1,000. And you compare that to the 50% of Americans who say they don't have $1,000 to cover an emergency expense. And then you're starting to make meaningful change in people's lives. So that's the other way we think about the success of the product.
Love that. And you also mentioned that you've got some other partnership collaborations going on. Can you speak a little bit about those too?
Yeah, this was definitely our deepest collaboration. Took multiple years, invested a lot in it. But once we launched, we were like, okay, this is going well, but we would like to scale more. And so one of the collaborations we just did this January is with Mr. Beast. If you don't know Mr. Beast, he's the largest YouTuber there is. And that one was much more of a, hey, it makes sense. You're making a piece of video content that's about protecting your money. Ties well with our product. Let's come together and do something quickly. And that probably took us 40 days from first conversation to launch. So very different type of partnership. But over there, it was based on the insight that there is a set of eyeballs that we would never get that he has access to. And that is who we were going after over there.
Any questions?
So you're investing in influencers, personalities, massive scale, ubiquity. That's what you're paying for. But I'm guessing that unaided awareness of Acorns still is very low. So what is the long term of when you start to dial down personalities to give you the awareness lift and start to invest more in growing brand by itself? Like, do you look at that of at what point can we sort of take off on our own, behind our own creative?
Totally. And this is a debate we constantly have. Because it's, what are you known for? It's very hard or it's very easy for these bigger celebrities to become what your brand stands for versus a brand story. So two things that we think of. One, in every piece of creative, how do we stay very, very consistent about our own brand storytelling so there is a cohesion there that allows you to break through versus deviating so much into the celebrity or the partner story that it dilutes the brand. So that's something we absolutely think of. The second thing that we think of is what other growth mechanisms are we leveraging? So for Acorns, 40% of our acquisition comes from our referral program. That is a very, very high percentage of acquisition to be coming from your existing customers who are telling your story. And over there, what we invest in is how do we give them the tools to tell our story best? So I don't know what that magic number is, but I do know that if I'm not doing both these things today, I am at risk of losing my brand story. And that is something we very much want to avoid.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.